There were emotional scenes in London this evening as BBC News presenter George Alagiah was remembered and honoured for his services to journalism. George passed away at the age of 67 in July, following on the BBC's longest-serving newsreaders spending the last decade living with bowel cancer prior to his death. Politicians, Alagiah's BBC colleagues and broadcasters from other channels all paid tribute to the inspirational star as the news of his passing broke earlier this year. Now, almost 4 months on from his heartbreaking death, George has been celebrated and recognized posthumously by his peers, with his wife Frances Alagiah collecting a Services to Journalism award on behalf of her husband at the 2023 Ethnicity Awards this evening. BBC newsreader Rita Chakrabarty had earlier penned a touching tribute to her beloved late colleague George, which was included in the event programme. The moving tribute from Rita reads, "For those of us of a certain age, growing up addicted to news and current affairs, who saw so few television journalists who looked like us, George Alagiah was a trailblazer and an icon." Although the industry still has many diversity challenges, our TV bulletins now regularly feature journalists of color. But in the 80s and 90s, it was a different story. Our role models comprised 4 people: Sir Trevor MacDonald, Moira Stewart, Zainab Badawi, and George. And it was George whom I most wanted to emulate. He made broadcasting look so easy, so natural. He had the rare gift of being able to turn complicated stories into clear and relatable television, with an on-screen warmth and charm that made him instantly charismatic. Not for nothing was his nickname Gorgeous George. I remember particularly his stint as the BBC's Southern Africa correspondent, where his deep knowledge and affection for the continent was apparent in all his reporting. Mine was one of those families where someone would call it George whenever he came on the news. Having a Sri Lankan who came from Ghana representing the BBC in Africa felt like a momentous breakthrough for those of us watching at home. When I first met George in the late 1990s, I confess I felt completely overawed. But he was with me as he was with everyone, friendly and interested, without a hint of grandness. Over the years he was a source of advice and encouragement, and as he grew into his role as an elder statesman of the newsroom, he led efforts made by a group of us, which included Clive Myrie, Mishal Hussain and myself, in ongoing meetings with the BBC Director General about trying to make our workforce more diverse. George faced his illness with a fortitude typical of him, and although we in the newsroom knew how sick he was, his death was a terrible collective shock. As we gave over our coverage that day to tributes to him, we did so with deep admiration, profound sorrow, and many tears. We miss him and everything about him, his wisdom, his support, and his wicked sense of humor about life's absurdities. George Alagiah, a giant of his profession and through his grace and decency, an inspiration to us all. George's death was announced on July 24, with the journalist's agent telling PA News Agency, "I am so terribly sorry to inform you that George Alagiah died peacefully today, surrounded by his family and loved ones." George fought until the bitter end, but sadly that battle ended earlier today. George was deeply loved by everybody who knew him, whether it was a friend, a colleague or a member of the public. He simply was a wonderful human being. My thoughts are with Fran, the boys and his wider family. Following the statement from George's agent being released, BBC Director General Tim Davies said, "Across the BBC, we are all incredibly sad to hear the news about George. We are thinking of his family at this time. George was one of the best and bravest journalists of his generation who reported fearlessly from across the world as well as presenting the news flawlessly. He was more than just an outstanding journalist, audiences could sense his kindness, empathy and wonderful humanity. He was loved by all and we will miss him enormously. Follow Mirror Celebs on Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube and Threads.